I really don't like leaving a job unfinished. It just doesn't feel good, you know? Then if I leave it half done or whatever, I won't ever be able to stop thinking about it, which just makes me wish I had finished the job back when I was still doing it. Now I have to do this, that, and get back into the headspace I was in when I was working on the project or whatever it was. I guess it's probably because I'm a huge procrastinator that I have this problem. I think of something I genuinely want to do, but it takes me forever to actually get started. Like this video, for example. I have an entire list of video ideas planned out, but it's hard for me to actually take the initiative sometimes, which I think we all struggle with occasionally. However, the more professional things get, the less leeway you really have for things like this. All of a sudden, the stakes are higher and the productivity needs to be better, especially when you have a corporate monster breathing down your neck at all times. I assume this is why behavior seems to struggle with fixing bugs a lot of the time. John Corporate says he needs a new DBD chapter every couple months, and the poor developers, graphic designers, 3D artists, and a bunch of other people have to work insane hours just to reach the deadline, which leaves some things left in the dust as the status quo constantly gets tougher and tougher, especially as the game gets more popular. This means some things will be left in the cracks as the hard workers struggle to keep pace, and some things that may have gotten a lot of focus before end up sort of fading away. Hey, in a completely unrelated way, do you guys remember the Realm Beyond? You know, back when Behavior was reworking a lot of maps to make them more modern and better looking by today's standards. Most of the time, they ended up just boiling down to visual reworks as the actual gameplay wasn't the biggest focus, unless it was for specific maps that were problematic for a long time, like Fractured Cowshed, Shelter Woods, or, Haddonfield. Regardless of what you think about these reworks, it was still pretty nice that Behavior was taking another look at some of these older maps and giving them some love when they definitely didn't have to do that. Even if you think that these maps were kind of shot in the head in terms of aesthetic, you can't deny that these maps still look pretty good. I mean, texture-wise at least, it's hard to deny that these maps are an improvement in almost every way. A ton of realms got a visual rework, and now they feel pretty up-to-date even as the game's been around for 9 years. Initially, these updates came out one after the other too, making it feel like the game was really turning over a new leaf. First, it was Larry's, which was packed in with the Doctor's rework that happened ages ago, and then Blight came out without a map, but was paired with the visual rework to both the Badham maps as well as the Yamaoka estate. Then, a little bit later, it was MacMillan, then Autohaven and Ormond, then Gideon and Crotus Pren, then you get the picture. Loading onto these maps now feels like a completely different experience than it was back in the day. Well, yes, they're not nearly as dark and gritty as they were at first. I still think they have their charm. Whether or not you think it's an improvement depends on you, but I tend not to dislike them very much, especially now that they've had so much more time to fit into the game. Either way, it's nice that all the oldest maps now look a bit more modern and have really nice lighting. Well, did I say all of them? What I really meant to say was most of them. In fact, one realm in particular has been almost completely forgotten by Behavior, and today I want to talk about why that may be. Grab your rain boots, we're taking a dive into the Backwater Swamp. But first, a quick thank you to Venus for giving me the idea for this video. You are awesome, and I hope this video meets the expectations you had, or at least covers the points you wanted me to hit. As always, if you want to see me take a crack at a certain topic, make sure to leave a comment below, and I'll keep an eye out for any comments that inspire me. I'm always going to shout out the person that left the comment, so if you have a video idea, let me know, and you may see yourself in a video in the future. Anyway, back to this video. Okay, so Backwater Swamp. What an interesting topic. Usually I pick videos that I can say a lot about, but the reason this video idea interests me is because there's a surprising lack of things to say, which is kind of the main point. This isn't my Coldwind video or my video on Gideon, where those maps have a lot of problems that I could spend hours upon hours yapping about. It was just one thing after the other, which made it easy to bounce from issue to issue, but the thing about Backwater is that it's remained largely the same for DBD's entire lifespan, for the most part. When it was first dropped, the Pale Rose was fucking massive, at 284 square tiles on release. To give you an idea, the largest map in the game right now is Shelter Woods, which is 176 square tiles, and I'd still argue that it's way bigger than it has any right to be, so imagine how miserable Pale Rose must have been. On top of the size, the map also had two of those piers, which are really annoying to navigate a lot of the time, and we'll get into that later, as well as the main feature of the boat and shack. Needless to say, the Pale Rose was not very favored when it dropped at this astronomical size, but given that this map was released back in 2016, I think we don't have to be too harsh on it. Fortunately, the map didn't stay this size forever. It was quickly patched to drop from its release size down to 215 square tiles, which is still way too big. And then it was dropped again down to 161 square tiles, which is where it sits today. A bit bigger than some maps, but still an okay size where you don't feel too annoyed when trying to get across it. for the most part. As for the actual pale rose, as in the boat or the main building, you have one really strong pallet on top of the boat, as well as some decent windows that do cause you to stagger, so you won't get insane value out of them as a survivor unless you're running balanced landing. The boat also has two potential spawns beneath, one god pallet and one just kind of a regular tile that isn't too good. The pale rose, again the boat, is a pretty strong main building, but is small enough to be manageable for a large chunk of killers. Once the pallets are gone, there's practically nothing working against you. On the rest of the map, there's surprisingly only one jungle gym, which is near the corner. However, you still have Shack, the smaller boat, as well as the potential for various junk tiles scattered around. However, depending on how bad your RNG is, the middle of this map might have almost nothing in it, especially if a junk tile spawn is taken up by a hill. Don't get me wrong, you can still get some okay setups on this map, but it also really depends on whether or not you're playing as or against a killer who handles junk tiles well, like Trickster, Huntress, Springtrap, or Deathslinger to name a few examples. The lack of regular jungle gyms does not help this map at all, as the rest of the map can feel pretty dead in a lot of matches. But don't worry, I'm not forgetting about the pier or the fucking poglog. I'll get to those later, given that they're problematic on both maps. Speaking of which, a year after Hag released with Pale Rose, Grim Pantry was added to the Backwater realm. This map was... okay, to be honest, I still don't really know how to feel about it. On release and for a while after, Grim Pantry had an incredibly annoying window that led into the main structure. It was luckily patched out later, but it still left a bad swampy taste in everyone's mouth. Ignoring that though, Grim Pantry probably has one of the most frustrating main buildings to navigate for both sides. The top of the pantry has a pretty strong window that can be vaulted at a really good angle for Survivor, which forces the killer to chase around a different way, which can make chases take a long time since rotating around may cause them to get a ton of distance on you, assuming you don't start a chase from that angle to begin with. On each side, there are pallets which, to be honest, are pretty weak. The only thing that might make them good for survivors is that they're pretty easy to see over, but are so short that it typically doesn't really matter. Just force the pallet down and pressure the survivor into a 50-50, which you'll inevitably win if you keep them there. That's it, it's not too bad. However, I can't say the same for the underside of the pantry. It is so hard to navigate down there at times. It's so easy to get turned around that it can really feel like you're absolutely lost and don't know which direction of the map you're facing. Ignoring that though, there's also 3 decent pallets that spawn underneath, as well as a window that has its strength hinged on the angle you run it at, like the window above. Sometimes you get a lot of value out of it, sometimes you don't. It really depends. However, the 3 pallets are strong enough on their own that you don't really need to worry too much about the window as a survivor. And again, depending on where the openings are, it can be really frustrating to face as a killer. The rest of the map has the same problem Pale Rose does, where a large chunk of the middle might just be dead and not really have any pallets in it. I mean, seriously, look at some of this footage I got, there's practically nothing here. However, you can also get lucky and have 2 junk tiles spawn right next to each other, which can be really strong in the right situations. I was genuinely surprised when going into customs at just how RNG dependent these maps can be. I had no idea it was this bad. Sometimes you can get a log tile right next to the shack, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can get good tiles to spawn close together, and sometimes you don't get any. It's baffling. I get that RNG plays a huge role in DBD balance, but this was still pretty crazy to see. Then, of course, we have the issues that affect both maps. For example, let's start with the pier. On each Backwater map, you have one location that the pier will always spawn. It's guaranteed. On Pale Rose, the pier spawns close to the middle of the map, with the front facing the shack. On Grim Pantry, the pier always spawns pointed towards the main building and is only a little bit of distance away. It sits parallel to shack. These piers can have some incredibly annoying setups. For example, some of you older players may remember when long wall jungle gyms and short wall jungle gyms were sort of fused together. This meant that both windows would spawn. Luckily, they were removed a bit later because they were absolutely miserable to go against. Well, apparently behavior missed one. For some reason, the pier either spawns a single window, ATL, or an OG jungle gym, featuring a pallet and 2 windows. Based on what you get, the pier can either go from pretty bad to really annoying, especially if the pier spawns some pallets in other locations. Remember when I was talking about RNG being especially brutal on these maps at times? Yeah, this just adds to it. Then we have pog logs, which are 2 long logs that can spawn around the edges of the map. They feature a pretty strong window inside them, and based on the killer you're playing, and of course the survivor's skill, you might just have to loop the log until the window becomes blocked, just based on how long the logs are. It's insanely frustrating. If you're playing an M1 killer without bamboozle, good luck. It's gonna take a while to take down the survivor there. This brings us to another thing, the edges of the map. For some reason, the Backwater Swamp maps have a hill surrounding the outer edge, where almost nothing spawns, other than the odd pallet or the aforementioned pog log. This means that a large chunk of the map is just filled with dead space that almost no gameplay happens in. The only time you'll spend in these areas will be most likely in the endgame when you're looking for the hatch, which takes forever on these maps, by the way, for this reason. These maps are also god tier for hex builds, as totems can spawn in these outer edges where survivors will only find them if they're actively looking for them, which will still take a long time due to how these hills surround the entire map. And finally, to top it all off, we have the aesthetic for this map. You like poo brown and bleak gray color schemes? Well, don't worry, Backwater Swamp has you covered. Back when Behavior removed a lot of the fog maps used to have in order to help with visibility and stuff like that as the game changed, a lot of the maps got uglier. You could see more, so the lack of great lighting as well as pop and textures made the maps kind of gross to look at. This was mostly fixed when the maps were reworked, as pretty much everything was upgraded. However, you want to know what maps haven't been reworked? Oh yeah, Backwater Swamp! This means the lack of fog shows you the entire map, which is so bland and ugly to look at. And no, it's not intentionally ugly because it's a swamp. I'd have no problem with that if that was the case. It's not the worst thing in the world, but compared to the newer maps released today, it kind of looks terrible. I would have less of an issue here if the gameplay was fine, but as we talked about, it really isn't. For some reason, Backwater has been left behind by Behavior, and I don't understand why every other OG realm has been reworked, but Backwater has been completely abandoned. I joked around during Banette's podcast, which you should watch, by the way, that Backwater must have some kind of foundational code for Dead by Daylight where the removal or reworking of it would crash the entire game and delete everyone's data.
Not this November, like not 2024, November of 2023. And me and my guest, I think it was the Mr. Headache, we were actually saying this exact thing. We were like, so yeah, they said they were going to rework Swamp again. They said it was coming. It still hasn't come. So I have a feeling it's going to happen soon. That was almost 2 years ago.
I don't know what they're waiting for. There's got to be like some sort of underlying issue where Swamp is so integral to the stability of Dead by Daylight that they can't rework it without breaking everything. There's no other reason that it should be taking this long. They were literally pumping out reworks like patch after patch when they first started doing it, and then for some reason it's been like years since the last one. They just won't do it for Swamp. I don't know why. That's legitimately the only reason I could think of for why such a glaringly problematic set of maps has been left to rot. And yes, I know there are other maps that are problems, but we're not talking about those today. I doubt they're afraid of ruining the gameplay of it. People do nothing but complain about Backwater from what I've personally seen. While it's certainly not as big of an issue as like Gideon is, it's still awkward to play on and feels miserable compared to a lot of the more fleshed out maps we get today. Like, compare Pale Rose to like Ormond Lake Mine, and it's a pretty glaring difference. There's just so many weird problems that it has. Even just reworking it to remove the stupid hills surrounding the outer edge would be fine in my book, but it seems like Behavior has no interest in doing that for whatever reason. I don't know why. Why rework every set of maps but this one? It just doesn't make sense. I have a hard time believing that it's just because it's a big project. They had no problem reworking the larger realms, right? We practically got those patch after patch, and it's been ages since the last map rework we got, so we're long overdue for something. It's a shame because I think a reworked Backwater map could look really cool with how well Behavior designs things today. They could do some really awesome things with it, as well as making the gameplay a bit more interesting and less RNG dependent, but I don't know when that'll happen. Either way, Backwater sits at being one of the most underwhelming realms in the game, and can be insanely frustrating for either side depending on the RNG aspect. I really hope Behavior lets us know if rework is ever coming, because I would jump for joy. Do you guys like Backwater? Do you think it's fine and I'm just crazy? Let me know in the comments below. But that's it for me, gamers. Have a great day.